When Karoline Leavitt walked into the studio that day, she was ready for a debate. She knew the questions would be tough, maybe even unfair, but she had faced that before. What she didn't expect was that, by the time she walked out, one of the most well-known TV hosts in the country would be on the verge of losing his job. This wasn't some pre-recorded segment where mistakes could be edited out. This was live. No safety nets, no second chances. Millions of people were watching in real time as the conversation took a turn no one saw coming. On one side of the table sat Karoline Leavitt, a rising conservative voice, young, sharp, and unshaken, in the face of controversy. On the other side was a veteran TV host, known for his aggressive interviews and cutting political commentary. He had gone up against major political figures before. He had built his career on pushing his guests to their limits. The topic, media bias, it was supposed to be a routine discussion, the kind that plays out on TV every night. But within minutes it became something much bigger. A single comment, one shocking line, would change everything. The conversation started the way most political interviews do, direct but controlled. The host wasted no time pressing Karoline Leavitt on her claims about media bias. With a sharp tone, he asked if conservatives were really being silenced or if they were just upset about being fact-checked. He pointed to right-wing outlets, accusing them of spreading false information and fueling division. His words were blunt, and his expression made it clear that he wasn't going to let Karoline off easy. But Karoline was ready. Without hesitation, she pushed back, staying calm and collected. She brought up real examples of mainstream news outlets twisting facts or ignoring stories that didn't fit their narrative. She pointed out moments when conservative voices were deplatformed, not for spreading lies, but for simply sharing opinions that clashed with the mainstream media's agenda. The debate was heated, but both kept their composure. Karoline stuck to facts, refusing to be rattled by interruptions or dismissive remarks. The host, though aggressive, remained professional, at least for now. The back and forth had the kind of tension that makes for great television, but it still felt like a standard political debate. Then something shifted. The host's patience seemed to wear thin. His tone became sharper, his interruptions more frequent. It was clear he wasn't just debating anymore. He was trying to trap her, to push her into a corner. Karoline, however, didn't back down. Every question meant to trip her up was met with a firm, well-reasoned answer. The studio air felt heavier with each exchange, the tension growing with every word. For a moment it seemed like this was just another tough interview, one that Karoline would walk away from having held her ground. But no one knew that the real moment, the one that would shake the entire network, was just around the corner. The conversation took a sharp turn. The host, clearly growing frustrated, started pressing Karoline harder. His tone shifted, his questions became sharper, and his patience began to wear thin. What started as a firm debate about media bias was now turning into something else entirely. He wasn't just challenging her points, he was attacking her credibility. "You keep saying conservatives are being silenced," he said, shaking his head. "But isn't it true that right-wing outlets are some of the biggest platforms in the country? Fox News, talk radio, independent conservative podcasts. How exactly are you being silenced?" Karoline remained composed. Being silenced doesn't mean conservatives have no platforms. It means they are targeted, deplatformed, and censored in ways that others aren't. When a conservative says something controversial, they get banned or demonetized. When a liberal does the same, they get a segment on late-night TV. The host scoffed, cutting her off. "Oh, come on. That's a tired narrative. People aren't getting banned for being conservative. They're getting banned for spreading dangerous misinformation." Karoline tilted her head slightly. "Like what?" The host hesitated for just a second, long enough to show he wasn't expecting that question. Then, instead of answering directly, he pivoted. "Look, it's about accountability. Platforms have a responsibility to stop harmful rhetoric." Karoline smiled slightly, knowing she had just exposed his weak argument. "So when CNN spreads false information like the Russian collusion hoax, should they be deplatformed?" The tension in the studio was thick. The host leaned forward, his voice growing sharper. "That's not the same thing, and you know it." "But it is. Karoline replied. False information is false information, unless, of course, the rules are different depending on who's talking. At this point, the host was visibly irritated. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head again. The interview was no longer a discussion. It was a battle. And he was losing. He had pushed, interrupted, dismissed, and tried to control the conversation. But Karoline wasn't backing down. And then, it happened. His frustration boiled over. And without thinking, he said it. People like you are the reason this country is backsliding. The moment the words left his mouth, the studio went silent. The producers stopped moving. The camera crew held their breath. No one spoke. The weight of his words hung in the air. Karoline didn't react immediately. She let the silence stretch, making sure the moment sank in. Then, with measured calm, she looked him in the eye and asked, "Would you like to clarify what you mean by people like you?" The host's face tightened. He hesitated. He knew he had stepped over a line, but now he was trapped. If he walked it back, he would look weak. If he doubled down, it could cost him everything. And Karoline knew it. She didn't have to say anything else. The damage was already done. Within hours, the internet was on fire. A 15-second clip of the exchange spread like wildfire across social media. The moment the host said, "People like you are the reason this country is backsliding," was clipped, shared, and analyzed from every possible angle. It didn't matter which side of the political spectrum people were on. Everyone had an opinion. Hashtags flooded Twitter. Fire, host name, media bias exposed, and a Karoline was right trended worldwide. Conservative commentators jumped on the moment, calling it proof of what they had been saying for years. "This isn't just a slip-up," one viral post read. "It's exactly how the mainstream media thinks. They don't even try to hide it anymore." Right-wing YouTubers dissected the clip, slowing it down, replaying the moment, analyzing every word, every facial expression. On the other side, liberal voices scrambled to defend the host. It was a slip-up, they insisted. He clearly didn't mean it the way it's being spun. Others claimed the clip was taken out of context, that Karoline had been baiting him the entire time. Some even suggested that conservatives were overreacting, trying to cancel someone for a single comment. Ironically, the same argument conservatives often made about cancel culture. But the damage was done. The video had already reached millions, and the reactions were snowballing. Memes flooded in, some mocking the host's reaction, others praising Karoline's calm response. Late-night comedians tried to brush it off, but even they had to acknowledge that the moment had become bigger than just one bad interview. Then came the part networks dread the most. Sponsors started pulling out. Big advertisers didn't want to be associated with controversy. They had seen what happened to other brands when they stayed silent too long. Calls and emails poured into the network's offices. "We're evaluating our partnership. We're concerned about brand, reputation." It was corporate speak for "fix this now or we're gone." Behind the scenes, panic set in. The network held emergency meetings. Could they just issue a statement? Should the host apologize? Or was this already past the point of no return? Executives knew that once advertisers started leaving, the situation rarely improved. Damage control had to happen fast. But as the pressure mounted, one question remained. Was the host going to survive this, or was his career over? Inside the network's headquarters, it was chaos. Executives filled a conference room, speaking over each other, trying to figure out how to contain the fallout. Some wanted to stand by their host, arguing that it was just a bad moment taken, out of context. Others weren't so sure. They saw the social media backlash, the advertisers backing out, and they knew how this usually ended. The host, once one of the network's biggest stars, was now a problem they needed to solve. The discussion wasn't about whether he had crossed a line. Everyone knew he had. The real question was whether the network could afford to keep him. Some executives feared that firing him would alienate their core audience. Others worried that keeping him would turn the controversy into a never-ending storm. After hours of back and forth, they settled on a temporary measure, hoping it would buy them time. The official statement went live. After careful review, host name has been placed on indefinite suspension pending an internal investigation. The views expressed during the interview do not reflect the values of our network. But the internet wasn't satisfied. The word suspension only made people angrier. To some, it felt like a weak attempt to calm the storm without real consequences. The calls for outright firing only grew louder. More brands hinted at pulling out, and the network's higher-ups realized that their half-measure wasn't working. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt played her hand brilliantly. She didn't go on a rant. She didn't demand anything. She didn't even give a full statement. Instead, she simply retweeted the viral clip. Just that one moment, no commentary, adding nothing but a thinking face emoji. That single emoji sent the internet into a frenzy. It was just enough to let the audience draw their own conclusions, fueling the outrage even more. Her supporters took it as a challenge. What did he really mean by people like you? Her critics were frustrated because she hadn't even said anything. Yet she was still controlling the narrative. The pressure on the network kept growing. News outlets picked up the story, running headlines about the host's suspension, the backlash, and Karoline's subtle but powerful response. The network executives had hoped this would die down, but instead it was only getting bigger. They had made their decision, but was it the right one? By the next morning, the network had made up its mind. The backlash wasn't slowing down. Advertisers were still pulling out, and the suspended host had become a liability they couldn't afford. The final decision was swift and brutal. A short, carefully worded statement was released. Effective immediately, host name is no longer affiliated with network. We remained committed to respectful and fair journalism. And just like that, one of the most well-known faces in television was gone. No farewell episode, no chance to explain himself, just a sudden exit. The media world exploded. News outlets ran breaking headlines, social media lit up again, and the debate shifted from the host's comment to whether his firing was justified. Two clear sides emerged. Conservatives celebrated the decision, calling it a rare moment of accountability. For mainstream media, for too long these networks have treated conservatives unfairly, one political commentator posted. This proves they can't get away with it anymore. Many saw the firing as a victory against media bias, a sign that there were consequences for attacking someone just for having different beliefs. Liberals, on the other hand, had a different take. They called it cancel culture, saying that a single moment of frustration had cost a veteran journalist his entire career. So we're just throwing people away now? A well-known left-leaning journalist tweeted. Others worried that this would set a dangerous precedent. If one mistake could get someone fired, who would be next? The debate raged on, but for the host, the damage was done. His career, at least in the mainstream, was over. The network had made its choice, but whether it was the right one depended on who you asked. The fallout from the firing was bigger than just one TV host losing his job. It sparked a much larger debate, one that wasn't going away anytime soon. People started asking tough questions. Was this true accountability, or had cancel culture gone too far? Did this mean public outrage now had the power to decide who stayed and who got erased from mainstream media? Right-wing commentators wasted no time in using the moment to their advantage. They framed Karoline Leavitt as the young, fearless conservative, who stood her ground and took down a so-called liberal elite. Headlines on conservative news sites painted her as a fighter against media bias. She became a symbol of what they saw as the growing rejection of mainstream news narratives. Panel discussions and primetime segments analyzed every detail of what had happened, using it to argue that left-leaning media figures were finally facing consequences for their words. Meanwhile, the broader media world couldn't stop talking about it either. The incident became a case study in newsroom ethics, free speech, and the power of social media-driven outrage. Every major network, podcast, and opinion column had something to say. Was this firing justified, or had the network caved too quickly? Would the same standard be applied to others in the industry? Surprisingly, even some left-wing voices weren't fully comfortable with how fast everything had unfolded. If a veteran journalist with decades of experience can lose everything over one comment, who's next? One well-known liberal commentator asked. Others pointed out that a culture of instant firings could create a chilling effect, where journalists became afraid to ask tough questions or express controversial views. The debate wasn't just about one host anymore. It was about the future of media, the limits of free speech, and the growing influence of public outrage. And no matter which side people were on, one thing was clear: this wasn't the last time something like this would happen. Few days after his firing, the former TV host finally broke his silence. He didn't go through traditional media. Instead, he took to social media and posted a video statement that instantly grabbed attention. Sitting in what looked like a home office, he spoke directly to the camera, his tone firm but controlled. "I was fired because I spoke the truth," he said. "The media doesn't want truth, they want compliance. If you step out of line, they erase you. That's what happened to me." Within hours, the video racked up millions of views. His supporters flooded the comments, calling it proof that mainstream networks were more interested in controlling narratives than allowing real discussion. The hashtag #StandWithHostName started trending, and conservative media figures quickly rallied behind him. Some framed his firing as an attack on free speech. Others saw it as an opportunity to expose what they believed was the hypocrisy of the media industry. Calls for boycotts against the network began to gain traction. Angry viewers announced they were canceling their subscriptions, vowing never to watch the station again. Some major advertisers also faced pressure, with people urging them to pull their funding. The network, already struggling with the backlash from the initial controversy, now had an entirely new problem on its hands. Despite the growing support, the host's statement also deepened the divide. His critics dismissed it as an attempt to rewrite the narrative. "This isn't about truth," one prominent journalist tweeted. "He made an inappropriate comment and faced the consequences. That's how accountability works." But for those who believed he was unfairly punished, this wasn't just about one person losing his job. It was about standing up to what they saw as a powerful industry silencing voices it didn't agree with. The battle wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. In the end, this wasn't just about one interview or one fired TV host. It became a bigger debate about power, media, and free speech. Some saw it as accountability. If you say something out of line, you face the consequences. Others believed it was proof that public outrage controls everything now, that no one is safe from being erased. So what do you think? Was this justice being served? Or was it cancel culture taking things too far? Should networks listen to online backlash? Or should journalists have more freedom to speak their minds even if it means pushing boundaries? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories that challenge the way you see things, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for the next one.